Hey friends, my name is Ernie. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something that has been a topic of conversation for quite some time: gluten. Chances are you've heard people talk about going gluten free. And if you've ever been to a restaurant, you've probably seen gluten free options in the menu. But have you ever wondered why gluten has become such a buzzword in the world of health and nutrition? There's a lot more to it than just trendy diets or food fads. For some, avoiding gluten isn't just a preference, it's a necessity. Stick around until the end because I'll be revealing hidden sources of gluten that aren't found in food. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing health tips that help you thrive. Two conditions often associated with gluten are celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. And while they might sound similar on the surface, they are actually quite different in how they impact the body. If you've ever been confused about the distinction between the two, you're not alone. The terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but the celiac disease and gluten sensitivity are distinct conditions with different causes, symptoms, and long term health implications. Before we get into the details of how each condition affects your health, let's take a moment to understand what gluten actually is. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye. It's what gives the bread that stretchy, chewy texture that many of us love. But for some people, gluten is more of an enemy than a delight. So, what happens when someone with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity consumes gluten? How does their body react? And why does it cause so many issues? Let's start by talking about celiac disease. This is a serious autoimmune disorder, which means it's a condition where the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own tissues. In the case of celiac disease, when someone eats gluten, their immune system goes into overdrive and attacks the lining of the small intestine. The small intestine has tiny finger like projections called villi that help absorb nutrients from the food you eat. When this villi gets damaged due to the immune system response to gluten, they can't absorb nutrients properly, leading to a wide range of health issues. Celiac disease can present itself in many ways. Some people may experience digestive symptoms like diarrhea, bloating, and stomach pain, while others might have more subtle signs like fatigue, anemia, or even skin rashes. What's really tricky about celiac disease is that it can sometimes take years for someone to be diagnosed because the symptoms vary so widely and can be easily mistaken for other conditions. What's even more alarming is that untreated celiac disease can lead to long term complications such as malnutrition, osteoporosis, infertility, and even certain types of cancer. This makes it crucial for anyone with the disease to strictly avoid gluten for the rest of their lives. So, how do you know if you have celiac disease? It typically starts with a blood test to check for specific antibodies that indicate the immune system is responding abnormally to gluten. If that test is positive, the next step is usually a biopsy of the small intestine to look for damage to the villi. While it may sound intense, these steps are necessary to confirm a diagnosis because celiac disease is a lifelong condition that requires careful management. Now, let's shift gears to gluten sensitivity. This is where things get a little less clear cut. Gluten sensitivity, sometimes referred to as non celiac gluten sensitivity or NCGS, is a condition in which people experience symptoms similar to celiac disease, but without the autoimmune response or intestinal damage. In other words, people with gluten sensitivity can feel pretty terrible after eating gluten. Think bloating, headaches, fatigue, joint pain, but they don't have the same immune reaction that you see in celiac disease. What's frustrating for many people with gluten sensitivity is that there is no specific test to diagnose it. It's a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning once conditions like celiac disease or a wheat allergy are ruled out, a doctor might suggest that gluten sensitivity is the cause of the symptoms. The only way to manage gluten sensitivity is to avoid gluten, but the strictness of the avoidance isn't usually as rigid as it is for those with celiac disease. That being said, gluten sensitivity can still have a significant impact on someone's quality of life, and it's not something to brush off lightly. The big question then is, why does gluten affect so many people so severely and others not at all? To be honest, scientists are still working to fully understand why gluten causes such a strong reaction in some individuals. For those with celiac disease, the answer lies in their genetics. People with celiac disease usually carry specific genes, HLA-DQ2 or HLA-DQ8, which predispose them to the condition. But having these genes doesn't mean you'll definitely develop celiac disease. It just makes you more likely to if certain environmental factors like a diet high in gluten come into play. For gluten sensitivity, though, it's not quite as straightforward. There is no genetic marker or clear biological pathway that's been identified yet. What we do know is that gluten sensitivity is a real condition, even if it's still somehow mysterious in terms of its root cause. It's thought to be related to how the body processes gluten, possibly involving the gut microbiome or immune system in ways we don't fully understand yet. One interesting angle to explore is the role of the gut microbiome. The microbiome consists of trillions of bacteria living in our intestines, and it plays a huge role in our overall health. From digestion to immune function, some researchers believe that an imbalance in the microbiome, often referred to as dysbiosis, might contribute to both celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. When the microbiome is out of balance, it can lead to inflammation and an exaggerated immune response, which could explain why some people react poorly to gluten. Speaking of inflammation, this is another major player in both celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. Inflammation is the body's natural response to injury or infection, but chronic inflammation, like what you see in people with these conditions, can be damaging over time. In celiac disease, the inflammation caused by gluten can lead to long-term damage to the intestines, while in gluten sensitivity, the inflammation may show up as more general symptoms like fatigue or brain fog. So, what happens when someone with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity removes gluten from their diet? The good news is that most people see a dramatic improvement in their symptoms. For those with celiac disease, avoiding gluten allows the belly in the small intestines to heal, which means nutrients can be absorbed properly again. Over time, energy levels improve, digestive issues fade, and long-term complications can be avoided. People with gluten sensitivity also tend to feel much better on a gluten-free diet, though their recovery might not be as dramatic as someone with celiac disease. However, they often report feeling less bloated, having more energy, and experiencing fewer headaches or joint pains. Now, you might be wondering, what about the rest of us? If you don't have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, should you still avoid gluten? This is a question that gets asked a lot, especially with the rise of gluten-free diets. The truth is, for most people, gluten is perfectly fine to eat. There is no scientific evidence to suggest that a gluten-free diet is healthier for people who don't have specific gluten-related conditions. In fact, going gluten-free can sometimes lead to nutritional deficiencies, since many gluten-free products are lower in essential vitamins and minerals like fiber, iron, and B vitamins. That being said, if you've ever felt consistently unwell after eating gluten, It's worth having a conversation with your doctor. Self diagnosing gluten sensitivity or celiac disease isn't the best approach, as other conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, wheat allergies, or even lactose intolerance can cause similar symptoms. Getting a proper diagnosis is key to figuring out the best way to manage your health. Another important point to consider is the growing prevalence of gluten free products. These days, there's an overwhelming number of gluten free options in stores, from pasta and bread to cookies and cakes. But just because something is labeled gluten free doesn't mean it's healthier. Many gluten free processed foods are actually higher in sugar and fat to make up for the lack of gluten. So, it's essential to read the labels carefully and focus on whole, unprocessed foods whenever possible. After all, a gluten free cookie is still a cookie. On the flip side, there are plenty of naturally gluten free foods that are packed with nutrients and can be a staple on any diet. Whether or not you need to avoid gluten, foods like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, nuts, and seeds, and a gluten free grains like quinoa, millet, and rice are all excellent options that provide essential nutrients without the need of gluten. These foods are rich in fiber, vitamins, and minerals that help support overall health, digestion, and energy levels. If you're new to gluten-free lifestyle, it can feel overwhelming at first, but once you start experimenting with different ingredients and recipes, you'll find that it's not as restrictive as it might seem. There are plenty of delicious and nutritious options that don't rely on gluten to be satisfying. And the more you understand how your body responds to gluten, the better you can tailor your diet to meet your unique needs. In the end, whether you're managing celiac disease, gluten sensitivity, or simply want to learn more about how gluten affects your body, the key takeaway is that personalized nutrition matters. What works for one person might not work for another one, and understanding your body's relationship with food is an essential part of living a healthy, balanced life. Taking the time to listen to your body and seek professional advice when needed can make all the difference in managing your health, especially when it comes to something like celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. These conditions remind us that there is no one size fits all approach to nutrition. It's all about learning how your body responds to different foods and adjusting accordingly. If you've been diagnosed with celiac disease, it's not just a matter of avoiding gluten here and there. It's a lifelong commitment. Even trace amounts of gluten can cause damage to the small intestine. So vigilance is key. You'll need to read labels carefully, ask questions when dining out, and be mindful of cross contamination in your own kitchen. That might sound overwhelming, but with time and patience, it becomes second nature. There's a strong community of people living gluten free, and so many resources available today that make navigating a gluten free lifestyle much easier than it used to be. Gluten sensitivity, on the other hand, is a bit more flexible in terms of managing the condition. Since there's no immune system damage happening, people with gluten sensitivity may be able to tolerate small amounts of gluten without feeling symptoms. It's a matter of trial and error, figuring out what works best for you and your body. Some may need to avoid gluten free entirely, while others might find that they can still enjoy that occasional slice of pizza or piece of cake without any major issues. One thing I think is really important is to address the emotional and social aspect of living with a gluten related condition. Food is such a central part of our culture and social life, and when you have to avoid gluten, it can sometimes feel isolating. Whether it's a family gathering, a dinner with friends, or even just grabbing a quick bite at a cafe, having to constantly think about what you can and can't eat can be exhausting. But here's the thing, it's absolutely possible to live a full, joyful life while managing your gluten free diet. It helps to become your own best advocate. Don't be afraid to speak up, ask questions, and make your needs known when eating out or attending social events. More and more people are becoming aware of gluten related issues, and restaurants are much more accommodating these days. It's also helpful to educate the people around you, family, friends, co-workers, so that they understand what it means when you say you can't have gluten. The more support you have, the easier it is to navigate those tricky situations. Another thing to keep in mind is that while avoiding gluten is essential for your health, it's also important not to become overly restrictive in other areas of your life. Sometimes when people go gluten free, they start cutting out entire food groups when they are afraid of eating something that might contain gluten. This can lead to nutrient deficiencies and a less balanced diet overall. If you're going gluten free, focus on what you can eat, like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and naturally gluten free grains. A balanced, varied diet is key to staying healthy, even without gluten. For those who don't have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity but are considering going gluten free for other reasons, it's always a good idea to do some research and consult with a healthcare professional before making any big changes to your diet. There's nothing wrong with experimenting and finding what works best for you, but it's important to approach any dietary change with a clear understanding of why you're doing it and how it can impact your overall nutrition. At the end of the day, whether you're managing a gluten related condition or just trying to eat in a way that makes you feel your best, it all comes down to listening to your body. Pay attention to how different foods make you feel, and don't be afraid to make changes if something isn't working for you. Our relationship with food is deeply personal, and there's no right or wrong way to approach it, just the way that works best for your health and happiness. So, if you suspect that gluten might be affecting your health, or if you're already being diagnosed with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, know that there is a path forward. It might take some time to adjust, and it might feel a little bit challenging at first, but with the right information, support, and mindset, you can absolutely live a vibrant, healthy life. In fact, many people find that once they remove gluten and their symptoms improve, they feel better than they ever thought possible. Ultimately, understanding the difference between celiac disease and gluten sensitivity is crucial, not just for those who live with these conditions, but for everyone who wants to be more informed on how food affects their body. There's a lot of misinformation out there about gluten, and separating fact from fiction can be difficult. But by learning more about how your body processes gluten and what your individual needs are, you're already taking the first step towards better health. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who could use a little extra inspiration on their health journey. Comment everything you want below, and see you on the next video.